Looks good. All right. All right. Hey, Indian Creek 8th grade students, welcome to today's daily e-learning update. I'm hoping this one will be a shorter one for us just because of the things that we're going to be doing. I know that there's a handful of you who've already tuned in, so why don't we just jump right into our daily e-learning updates. So it is Wednesday, April 8th. I hope everyone who's tuning in or who's watching is having a great day so far. Yesterday was maybe the nicest day we've had probably this entire year since last summer, and it's looking like today is going to be a pretty nice one as well. I'm hoping a lot of you were able to get outside, do some things out there, and I hope you get to do the same thing today because unfortunately it's looking like we're going to get some storms coming through, and then things are going to kind of be back to the way that unfortunately it has been, where we're looking at more of kind of like that extended winter weather and not really getting any chance to enjoy being outside and reinforcing our social distancing. But anyway, so yesterday, ELA attendance with the journal form, we had 47 out of 51 people turn that in. That's awesome. And then as of maybe 15 minutes ago, we had 34 out of 51 students who had turned in their quiz for Civil Rights Part 3. So I feel like that's better than we did the first two quizzes, which is great. And please just make sure if you're one of the people who hasn't turned that in yet, that you get that taken care of. And then yesterday's journal prompt for language arts was, we were talking about track 6 of your personal soundtrack, and we were looking for a song that you felt was underrated or what you would describe as your guilty pleasure song. So here were some of the highlights from that journal prompt yesterday. From first hour, we had Liar by Jack Avery. We had someone who said basically any song by Florence and the Machine is one that they really enjoy, that just makes them want to dance. We had Fool's Gold by One Direction. We have a student who feels like One Direction's kind of fallen by the wayside and that was an underappreciated song. We had Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People, which I remember when that one was big. And then Boom Clap by Charlie XCX. Moving on to second hour, we had Stupid from Tate McRae. She's Like the Wind by Patrick Swayze. I thought that was a pretty funny one. Waylon Jennings with Good Old Boy, going with a nice country throwback there. Rockstar by Nickelback. I feel like Nickelback is one of those bands where they're always either considered overrated or underrated depending on if you like them or not. I've heard a lot of people really put down Nickelback, and then others who have said, I really enjoy Nickelback. And then Candy Paint by Post Malone, obviously huge artist right now, so that would be one I think that could be described as an underrated song of his. And then finally, moving on to third hour, we had Some Kind of Monster from Metallica. Anybody who listens to Metallica, they've had so many big hits, but that's one that's really not ever thought of. Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen is a song that all of you have probably heard, but at the same time, I do agree with this student that it could be one that is a little bit underrated and that I really enjoy as well. We had Big Iron by Marty Robbins, Heart and Soul from Camp Rock, always good to get some Disney in there. And then one that I feel would be one of the quintessential guilty pleasure songs, which was Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice. So those were some of the journal responses from yesterday in terms of your guilty pleasure or a song that you feel was underrated. So let's move into our plan for today. For those of you who didn't see, and I did get contacted by some students, some parents, grades were updated yesterday to reflect the work from our first week. Well, I guess technically this is like our second week of e-learning, but first post-spring break week of e-learning. I'll go over our Google form and vocab review for today. We'll talk about the one box on the Allegory Chart for Animal Farm you were asked to fill in yesterday. And then your assignment for language arts today is going to be to read Chapter 2 for Animal Farm, so we'll talk about that. Then into social studies, we'll go over the quiz from yesterday. I'll talk about some of the protest video responses that you all submitted yesterday for the assignment, and then today's assignment, which is current events. All right, so why don't we start with talking about the grades that were updated from yesterday. As of right now, with this being a new situation for all of us, grading is something to where I'm trying to make it where you all are getting feedback and you're still being held accountable for the work that you're doing. But I also understand that because we're not able to do standards-based grading, we're not able to have that face-to-face contact, I also am not going to make e-learning something to where it's going to be a major detriment to your grade. Basically, I'm hoping that with e-learning, if you're putting in the time that is expected of you and you're meeting the workload and the expectations that that I have, that I hope a lot of you have for yourselves, that this can only help your grade, and that really, the only way that e-learning could really negatively impact your grade is if you're just simply not doing your work. So those were updated. There were 3 things that went in. The first was the Russian Revolution Prezi sheet, which was basically, if you filled out all the information, you filled it out accurately. Those short response questions, you gave more than just a brief blurb of an answer. You should have gotten full credit for that. Then there were the 2 allegory practice assignments for Yertle the Turtle and for the Sneetches. Again, if you were putting some thought into your answers, even if they weren't completely accurate, you should have gotten all or almost all credit. That was out of 20, so if you had a very low score, there's a chance that you're one of the students who just hadn't turned one of those in yet. If you do, obviously, your grade will not be negatively impacted for any of these with late work. Just make sure that you get that in as soon as possible. And then for the journals, this was kind of the hardest one for me because obviously when we do journals normally in class, you're writing for 10 to 15 minutes. And you all know the expectations I have for that I'm looking for 10 to 15 minutes worth of writing. I'm thinking more for the journals now, more like 5 to 7 minutes, but that means that I am still expecting 5 to 7 minutes worth of writing. So if you were someone who's just responding to these song questions with just one sentence every time, you were probably looking at 14, 15, maybe 16 out of 20, just depending on how consistent your responses were and things like that. Because every journal prompt we've had has been asking you about a song and then asking for why. So I feel like all of you know the expectations, and I'm looking for that added detail, what makes the song individual and unique to your taste and why you like it. So I'm looking for more than just, I chose this song because it makes me think of this. That's something that, if we're thinking of time-wise, that's something you could come up with in a minute or 2 minutes tops. So just going a little bit further means that you'll be up into that, 18 out of 20, 20 out of 20 for our next set of journal responses. So if you're someone who you saw your journal grade and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I know there were a couple prompts that I probably could have added more. If you want to go back in and submit an additional journal response, you want to say, hey, I originally chose this song for my guilty pleasure song. I just wanted to add that it makes me think of this, and here's why I consider it a guilty pleasure. So you do have those opportunities to boost your grade up. Just because it's in the gradebook now for e-learning does not mean that it's set in stone. All right, so those are the grades that were updated yesterday. Please let me know if you have any questions individually, because obviously I want to address them with you as soon as possible. All right, so now our Google form for today, you actually don't have our journal prompt for today. I figured since you're going to be reading Animal Farm, I wanted to make it to where, the audiobook is about 16 minutes long. If that's what you're listening to, that's all you need to worry about working on for today. So part 1, Animal Farm, as I said, please read chapter 2. The audiobook starts at right around 18 minutes, and then in the text version, it starts on page 5. It's about 16 minute long, and then I think it's about 4 pages long in terms of reading length. So nothing that should be too big of an issue for anybody. Then part 2, I put an optional vocab review on quizzes, just a review game over units 1 through 5. Again, this assignment is optional. You don't have to do this, but I just wanted to give that opportunity for people who felt like they hadn't gotten to review their vocab words a lot. And I mean, most of you, I'm sure, know them, or at least remember most of them. So it should be a pretty easy assignment overall. You'll notice on the form, it says you will not lose credit if you don't complete it. So if you don't complete it, then on the grade book, you'll just be marked as excused. and it will not negatively impact your grade in any way. However, if you do the quizzes review, even if you miss some of the questions, I think it's 32 questions, even if you miss some, if you complete the entire quiz and have clearly put your effort into it, you'll get full credit for an assignment just for doing it. So I would kind of think of it as free points. Again, it's something that's only meant to help your grade. Obviously, if you just go in and click random answers and get like a 20%, you won't be receiving credit for that. But it is a way that you can just get some extra points, putting in that extra time for e-learning for those of you who would like to do that. And then for part 3, just so that you have a question answered, the attendance question is, did you read chapter 1 of Animal Farm when it was assigned? Again, I would just prefer honesty. I realize there are some people who didn't read it when it was assigned. That's okay. So just click yes or no, submit, and then that's your attendance form for today. Okay. Let's move over to the Allegory Chart, which was your assignment from yesterday. I'll wait a couple seconds here for everyone to open this up. I hope no one submitted this to Google Classroom yet, because you're going to be using this throughout the entire time that we're reading Animal Farm. So if you did submit it already, just please click unsubmit, open it back up, and then you'll be able to continue adding while we are reading. All right, so again, I'll give everyone just a minute or two here to open this up. And we were talking yesterday about, we went over Old Major. We talked about who he represents from history, that he stands for both Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. And then for Mr. Jones, I told you that he represents Tsar Nicholas, who was the ruler of Russia before the revolutions. All I wanted you to fill in was this box here, that support, where you're connecting the allegory to your character. All right, so, and actually, you know what, I'll zoom in a little bit just so everyone, if you're looking on the screen, can hopefully see it. But what I did is I just took a quotation from chapter 2, so from today, on page 6, which says, Mr. Jones, although a hard master, had been a capable farmer, but of late he had fallen on evil days. He had taken to drinking more than was good for him. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen. And I said, Mr. Jones is losing touch with his duties as a farmer. He's neglecting his animals. And this is just like Tsar Nicholas, who caused many Russian men to die in World War I. And there were a lot of people who thought that he was not doing enough for the country as its leader as a whole. So that's the connection that you can see between how Mr. Jones is treating his animals versus how Tsar Nicholas was treating his people in this lead up to the revolution where he would be overthrown. Okay, so that was it for the Allegory Chart. Again, you can feel free to fill in what I have, and then as we continue forward, we'll continue looking at other characters. Anytime you want to make a guess, obviously here in the word bank, I would say either do a strike through or bold, underline, whatever it is, so that you know you've assigned that figure to a character. Just so you're not saying that 3 different characters represent Joseph Stalin, because it's only one. All right, and then just like I said before, your assignment for today is chapter 2. I just wanted to give you a brief little preview of some things to look out for while you're reading, if you want to keep them in mind. And the 3 things that you can look out for while you're reading are Mr. Jones's continued mistakes, which I've already kind of touched on a little bit, and then what they lead to. I'm sure some of you can guess on what's going to happen based on history. Look at the different animals who begin to take on leadership roles amongst their fellow animals, and then also look at the cliffhanger ending. And actually here, I'm going to come through and bold these just so that I can make sure, just because in looking at the screen, I don't know how clear it is just for those of you watching, but hopefully this will help out a little bit. And actually here I can zoom in a little bit as well, just to make sure that you can see the 3 things to be looking out for those of you who want to look out for them while you're reading. If you just want to read or just want to listen, that's no big deal. This is just more of a hint for things to look at going forward. All right, so that's the preview for chapter 2 for Animal Farm. Like I said, that's your assignment for tonight. That's all you have if you don't want to do the vocab review, because the review is optional. All right, and then so now we'll transition over to social studies. This was the quiz from part 3. Like I said, we have 34 people who have turned it in. I can't remember if that's exactly what I had at the beginning of the live stream or not, but a pretty good number. I feel like more than ones we had for the first 2, at least at this point. So again, the 2 events, describe one of the major events in integrating American universities. You could have talked about the University of Alabama and what happened there. You could have talked about Ole Miss and James Meredith. In both cases, that there were troops or National Guardsmen who had to be called in, and the fact that the integration of Alabama, where the governor stepped down, that this pushed John F. Kennedy, who was the president at the time, to pass a civil rights bill that he had been considering for a while. And then for the second question, it was John F. Kennedy who won the presidential election in 1960. We talked about how his debate with Richard Nixon, where people who watched saw his youth, his charisma, and considered him to have been the one who won the debate, versus the people who listened who thought that it was actually Nixon, because in terms of what Nixon was saying, actually had a little bit more substance. But it was John F. Kennedy who won the election in 1960, and then in 1963 in Dallas, he was assassinated. So that would have been question 2. As long as you touched on both points, should have gotten, or you should get a 4 out of 4, and those will be getting graded today. So those of you who hadn't turned one in yet, you will be getting an email, just a reminder to get that turned in. And then for today, in social studies, it's just another attendance form, just a quick yes or no question, which is, have you completed your current events assignment for today? So now we'll go over to the civil rights protest response, which was the assignment from yesterday. This is where I had given you a video, one each, on the Montgomery bus boycott, freedom rides, and sit-ins. You were asked to watch one video and then write down 2 facts that you learned. I went through all of the responses that were turned in, which I want to say was right around the same number as the quiz, so about 34, 35. And these are answers that you all gave. So this is nothing from me. This is all from all of you, which I appreciate, because, you know, this is basically you doing the work here. This is just me sharing it out to everyone else. So thank you to everyone who turned in this assignment. But here are some of the facts about each of the protests. So the bus boycott, we talked about how, or a student talked about how there were 50,000 flyers were given out by Joan Robinson, one of the women running the boycott, that encouraged others to join her. We had that the bus boycott lasted for 382 days, so over a year. We had another student who talked about that when these protesters were not riding the buses, they needed to find other forms of transportation. So some of them would buy cars, especially station wagons. And there were groups of people who would create almost bus-like routes where they would drive around the city, pick people up, and drop them off, almost like a free taxi service, so that people could get to where they needed to be. And then we had finally another student who said there were a number of people who had also violated the rules of sitting in the white side or the white area of a bus. So just reinforcing that it wasn't just Rosa Parks. There were other protesters who did this as well. So then for the freedom rides, we had a student say that they learned that prison didn't do a thing to the morale of the freedom riders who continued to preach nonviolence to anyone who would listen. We had another student who said that protesters came outside of a church and held a meeting to bring attention to the freedom rides, and that the National Guard was sent in to protect them. We had another student who learned that the freedom riders themselves were all different races and religions, not just African Americans. And then finally, we had a student who said that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the Attorney General, who was Robert Kennedy. Yes, that's John F. Kennedy's brother. And he asked the Attorney General for help. This is what led to the National Guard being sent out, and they would help clear out the mobs who were threatening to set the building that the freedom riders were sitting in on fire. So those were 4 facts that were learned about the freedom rides. And then finally down here for the sit-ins, we had a student say that she had learned that on May 28th, the first sit-in took place. 14 people participated, and this was the most violent sit-in. We had another student say that they didn't realize how violent the sit-ins got and that there were protesters who were afraid they weren't going to make it out alive. There were people who thought protesters would be arrested immediately, but that this wasn't the case. And then we also had a student mention that it was a white girl sitting down with the protesters. That's what made things even more violent during this sit-in. So those were 4 facts for each of the videos. If you did not turn this in, it can be a little help for you. I would obviously, prefer that you go through and watch the videos yourselves, but this was just a little bit of help to give you along the way. So again, I appreciate everyone who turned it in, and thank you for giving me the help that I needed to have this for your classmates just to go over these answers. All right, and then finally, here's your assignment for social studies today. It is a current events article looking at the Wisconsin primary, which was held yesterday. Again, with current events, trying to bring things in that aren't just specifically about coronavirus. Obviously, this plays a part. But basically, the article just talks about the fact that in almost all other states, primaries have gone to either strictly mail-in or have been postponed. And in Wisconsin, there was this back and forth where originally the governor tried to delay the election, but then the legislature, Wisconsin's version of Congress or the General Assembly, turned it around and pushed back and eventually was overturned by the Supreme Court. And so Wisconsin held their primary yesterday. And so you can read through, and the only response question that you have down here at the bottom is, do you think that Wisconsin was right to hold its primary last night, or do you think it should have been postponed? And then why? So you could either say that you think it was okay because obviously voting is very important. We're in the middle of a presidential primary, and there is no really right that a lot of American citizens hold as being more important than the ability to vote. Or you could take the other route and say it should have been postponed. Obviously, the coronavirus, it talks about how many people have gotten sick and things like that. There is no wrong answer as long as you answer that part about why. And then finally, would you have gone out to vote if you were a legal Wisconsin resident? Obviously, that's up to your own opinion. You could say, yes, I would have because Wisconsin's not as populated. I wouldn't be worried about getting sick. Or you could have said, no, I wouldn't because I don't want to risk getting myself or others infected with coronavirus. However you think about it, again, there is no wrong answer other than just not doing your current events response. So that's all you have for today for social studies. So chapter 2 of Animal Farm for Language Arts. Make sure you get your forms submitted. There is the optional vocab review, but you don't have to do it. It's optional. Then for social studies, it's just read the current events article and do your response. So hopefully this shouldn't take you that long, and you'll all be able to get to go outside, enjoy this weather, obviously while still social distancing and following in the guidelines that have been passed down. Again, please continue to email me with any questions you have on these assignments, on any other assignments. I'm always happy to hear from all of you. Like I know I've said it before, I do miss seeing all of you, and I really, really hope that we will get back together in class before the end of this school year. I don't know how likely I'd say that is, but that's what I'm keeping my fingers crossed for. But in the meantime, on YouTube, via email, those are the ways that you can still get in touch with me. Like I said, try and keep things as close to face-to-face contact as possible. All right. Otherwise, I will be back again tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 o'clock. Everyone have a wonderful, safe, and healthy rest of your day. And this has been Professor Blazek, and I will see you next time.